Naha prachodayat. O Lord, supreme of infinite grace, Lord of earth, heaven, and space, we meditate upon thy glory sublime. Imbibe within us thy attributes divine. May thee guide our intellect on the path of our duty, guide the rudder of our life's canoe, and steer us through the tempest of life's battle safely across the ocean. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Thank you very much, Panditji. Friends, for those of you who do not know me, I'm Karuna Mohan, and thank you for joining us in this webinar focusing on Vedic education and spirituality, which takes place at a very auspicious time. It's the beginning of Ramayan week, it's Ramadan for our sisters and brothers who follow the Islamic faith, and it was the Hindu New Year yesterday, and today it's the Tamil New Year. And on the 10th of April, it was also the founding of the Arya Samaj. So it's a nice time for us to have this discussion. Please make sure you mute yourself, as other persons might be distracted by the sounds that come from your end. And should you need to converse bandwidth, please stop your video. Please use the chat facility to place your comments and views. This webinar will be participatory and you're encouraged to share your views. To speak during the discussions, please unmute yourself, and once you have spoken, mute yourself once more. We conceptualize the virtual bridge series to share knowledge, better understand challenges facing society, and to grow and develop spiritually. Lectures online commenced in May last year. In the current series, we have webinars which commenced in October last year and will run through to November this year. The dates and topics have been shared on the Arya Samaj Gauteng Facebook page. The focus of the Virtual Bridge series is on reform in religion, revolution in society, and liberation of mindsets, as set out by the founder of the Arya Samaj. The Arya Samaj led the way with equality for women and education for women. It also ended social discrimination based on caste and brought back the Vedas into focus. Under the theme, Finding Meaning in the Current Context, we had a session on gender and economics, followed by a conversation on Who Am I?, where we discussed creating a balance between ancestry, heritage, and identity. In December, our webinar also discussed the developmental state. And then in February, we focused on socioeconomic justice. And on the 24th of February, we looked at social cohesion and social justice. On the 17th of March, we commemorated International Women's Day with the topic Gender Rights Are Human Rights. Our last webinar focused on water. Going forward in May, our webinars will focus on what can we do in South Africa regarding these issues we discussed in each of the webinars. So please take notes, try and remember the issues, think about them, and share your views and contribute to plans for the future of the Arya Samaj. The consultation and your views will be presented to the Arya Pratinidhi Sabha Exco strategic session, which will be held in future. In May last year, the Arya Samaj joined the Climate Justice Coalition and is a signatory to the Climate Justice Charter, which has been lodged with the South African Parliament. In addition, the Arya Samaj supported the call for a basic income grant. Other matters arising from the webinar was the need for developing leadership with capability to navigate the 21st century, interfaith engagements for social justice, developing new material based on Vedic literature, and a program for women to be included in the economy. The APS has taken the lead in focusing on what we can do to bring about climate justice with Earth Hour and with Earth Day coming up on the 22nd of April. In addition, the Arya Samaj has endorsed the statement of Defend Our Democracy to ensure that the democracy be secured in South Africa is maintained. The Arya Samaj has participated in an interfaith meeting in Gauteng to look at the upcoming local government elections. Now, Vedic education and spirituality is a prominent feature of the Virtual Bridge series. The first series, from May to September last year, were delivered on a number of topics. This webinar was supposed to be held in January this year. And on the 14th of January, it was World Logic Day. And it was going to be an attempt to share some salient features that point to the multi-value logic found in Vedic philosophy, which makes up the spiritual systems. It's often said that Vedic philosophy provides answers to all unanswered questions. The multi-value logic, beginning with the Vedas, is described as a four-value logic. The Nasadya Sukta is a very good example of it, and Patanjali and Panini used it extensively. The four values of this logic system indicate that some things are true, then it says that some things are false, and then it says that some things are both true and false, and then the fourth part is that it says that it's neither true nor false. Now, these values open up the arena for debate in the Upanishads, and there are some very interesting debates in the Upanishads. Why is there pain and pleasure? Why is there rich and poor? Why are people healthy and others sick? God and his qualities, the nature of God and the nature of society and the works of God. The soul itself, its nature, its qualities, reincarnation, how does it happen? Why is one born and as he or she? And then there's the issue of the purpose of life and what we ought to do. To live according to the Arya Samaj principles, we need to be critical and questioning of our current context and circumstances. Today, we will delve very briefly into the multi-valued logic of Vedic philosophy. Dr. Ram Vilas needs no introduction. He's a Sanskrit scholar, a past president of the Arya Samaj, and a very dear friend, probably known to all of us. He will provide an analytical overview of the definition and acquisition of knowledge based on Nyaya, one of the 6 darshans. Nyaya is the Indian critique of logic. Swami Dayanand used Nyaya as the foremost authority in his logical exposition of the Vedas as the handbook of all true knowledge. Our second speaker today is Professor Pankaj Joshi, based in Pretoria. He's also a leader in his own right. As an academic and medical professional, he keeps one foot firmly in medical science. His other foot is entrenched in dharma. He's the president of Rishi, the Ramakrishna Institute of Spirituality and Hinduism. His association with the Arya Samaj goes back to when the late Bhairam Baros, president of the APS, nominated him to represent Hindus at the religious forum post the unbanning of the ANC. It was both Dr. Ram Vilas and Professor Joshi that blessed the formation of the Gauteng Arya Samaj. They both spoke at the launch of the Arya Samaj in Gauteng on Heritage Day on the 24th of September 2005 at the Marlborough Community Center. Today, we have them back as the team for this webinar. Dr. Ram Vilas, please share your views with us on Vedic knowledge, Vedic logic. And I'm indeed grateful to you for accepting to delve into this topic that I discussed very briefly with you. Before we move on, can I please ask the technical person to spotlight Dr. Ramvilas?
Namaste, Karuna.
Namaste.
Namaste
Please go ahead,
to
Dr.
all of
J.
you that have joined in. I've sent a presentation both to you and to Lekha, and I hope we can share that. It'll be very difficult to do my presentation without it. So if you can just assist me, there you are. All right. Thank you very much for that. Once again, thank you everyone that's joined in. Like Karuna said in the introduction, when you get hymns like the Nasadiya and other such, the hymns on creation, similarly, we have various aspects and a whole host of literature that is deemed as having its authority and source in the Vedas. And so we have the six darshanas, right? The six schools of thought in Indian philosophy. And time does not allow us to go into each one and explain the some people regard all of the six schools as complementing and supplementing one another, while others believe in them very strictly as separate philosophies. So, like I said, there's not much scope for that right now. But today, we're just going to look at one of the systems, Nyaya, because Nyaya is the oldest of the six. And it is, in a way, it is a preface to knowledge and how we go about ascertaining, and for that matter, using some criteria in determining knowledge, its authority. And the word, I don't want to, become pedantic, but the word is epistemology. What is the epistemology of Nyaya? In ascertaining the authority and how one goes about ascertaining, the constructs of knowledge. So therefore, in the introduction, I've got Vedic logic. So if you even went onto the internet and looked at Nyaya, it'll be called Vedic logic. And the world view of the Indian traditions of the Vedas, the worldview meaning how it views the world, will be contained and will help you understand why and how the rishis then took knowledge and tried to test it and put it through so that they could present this rationale to us. So I'm saying to you there that we're trying to understand the logic that prevails in the laws of the universe, and then how it underpins our knowledge, because we are part of this creation. So our understanding of this creation would be our place in this creation. And then how we perceive and how we construct or how we create constructs of knowledge. So, and then also from the Vedas, we go to the darshanas. The darshanas simply try and understand and give us an exposition of how the Vedas go about presenting the truth to us or presenting true knowledge to us. Now, in Nyaya, like I said, I want to get onto it, and time will not allow us for too much of a detailed discussion, but I hope you are understanding the, the very essence of what we're trying to present here. So there, it says there are 8 evidences. The 8 evidences that we use in trying to evaluate knowledge. Right? And the first one is called intuition or pratyaksha. I'll say that again, it's called pratyaksha. Now, pratyaksha is through our organs of perception. In other words, through the eyes. These are the sensory organs. Why they're called sensory organs, right? We have, jnana indriya and karma indriya. Karma indriya are like your hands and legs. They perform actions. But jnana indriya, jnana or jnana indriya are this those organs that we use to acquire knowledge or to perceive things, like through the ears we hear, through the eyes we see, through the skin we feel and we have touch, with the tongue we have taste, with the nose we have smell. Right? So when there is a direct perception through the related gunas, gunas mean, right, with the, like I said to you, with the ears, the sound, with the eyes, the guna is vision, with the skin, the guna is touch, right? And so on. So with this sense organs and the related senses of perception, right, such knowledge is then transmitted to the mind, and from the mind to the soul or to the conscious entity. So the knowledge then acquired through these organs of sense perception, sensory perception, is called pratyaksha. Then it gives you exceptions, right? So we have to be guarded now. It always tells you, but remember that if I said to you water, right, you have through the name understood what water is, but you're not necessarily seeing water in front of you. You understand? Now that has to do with memory and so on. You've already acquired the knowledge and you know what water is, but the initial knowledge and understanding of water was through the sense perception, and we must not mix that up with somebody saying water, bring me a glass of water. So, and the person who's listening to you also understood that you need water, but the sensory perception, technically hasn't taken place. All right. Then the other one is false perception, right? Because now again you're seeing, but what you're seeing is not necessarily right. For example, right, you see a pillar in the distance and you thought it's a person standing there. Probably you got a fright and you quickly ran away and you slept. But when you get up in the morning, you see the same person there, but it's not a person. Now that there is light there, and that light represents knowledge, your knowledge is corrected. You have the true knowledge of it. And you see now, it is not a person that was standing there. It was a pillar. Another example is you open the door and you see a piece of rope and you think it's a snake. So that's false perception. Only later on, somebody tells you, no, man, that was a piece of rope. Or for somehow or the other, you come to know that's a piece of rope there. And then it's still perception through the sensory organs, but initially it was not correct. And somehow that perception gets corrected, right? And then also in identifying, sometimes you're not sure of the exact nature, although using your sense organs, you're not, you don't have a precise knowledge of what it is there. For you see a person in the distance and you can't make out, you are seeing, you're using your eyes, you see, but you're not sure whether it is Sohan or Mohan. Now I'm giving these examples because these are the examples that are given in the Nyaya Sutras. Right? So you're not sure whether it's Sohan or Mohan. So although you are using your eyes to see, right, that pratyaksha has got a defect in it. So it warns that when you have pratyaksha, be careful that it is free of these three defects, right? Where there is uncertainty or the perception, the process of perception has not been correct. All right. So that's pratyaksha. Now, the second one is inference, and the word is anuman. Right? Anuman is perception, right, and inference, when you guess something is happening. Right? So, for example, and the easiest way is to look at an example, when we see smoke, we infer that there is a fire burning. Right? So as soon as we see the smoke, automatically, right, we link it to a fire, and that is going to come in here. So it says, and how do we do that? Inference forward. So when we see clouds, then we guess or we predict that it's going to rain. It's a natural thing, right? To see clouds and expect that it will rain. inference backward, when you're guessing backward. Now, when you see something and you're trying to work out why, right? For example, you see the river in flood. It's not raining, but the river is in flood. So then you guess and you say, well, it must have rained somewhere where this river has come from, probably the mountain or the source, and it's rained there. Therefore, there is flood or excess water in the river. Right? And then there's concomitant inference, right? Which means, right, when you talk, when there's something natural that you expect to happen, for example, if a person has to go somewhere, right, then there's a simple rule that everybody has to leave a place and engage in the action of going to reach somewhere. So when somebody has come somewhere, you then, infer that he left point A and has come to point B. So knowledge followed by preceding example on seeing smoke, right? The inference is fire. This is the main example that is used where we infer or we work out that because of a particular thing, by association, we guess the existence of the other. Right? Then the comparison is called upamana, anumana and upamana, where we learn and compare things, right? So we have an acquired knowledge and we use that to try and work out something else. For example, right, you have an acquired knowledge, right, and it's written there to make a comparison, an analogy. For example, now you're saying to somebody, go and bring me a yak, and that person doesn't know what a yak is. So you say, right, the yak looks like a cow. So the person who goes to look for I remember I'm using these examples that are given in the Nyaya Sutras. So when you go and look, you'll find obviously not going to bring a cow, but you're going to look at an animal that looks very much like a cow and say, okay, looks like the cow, and this must be the yak. And you bring along the yak, and you have used your knowledge of upamana, of a simile or comparison. Can we just move the slide up a bit? Okay, are we all right so far? So the pratyaksha, anumana, and upaman. Right? So like I explained to you, we say it looks like a cow, and then you're going to find an animal that resembles a cow. Then verbal authority is the fourth one, right? Which speaks of the shabda or the word. This is a very important one. So the teachings of an apta, a learned person, like in the Vedas, we have the rishis, and such people who we know, right? And of course, based on, virtues and morals, we trust is a learned person, and such a self-realized soul then becomes authority, right? He is learned, righteous, truthful, benevolent and disciplined, and adept in self-restraint. So even tells you what kind of person. He's just not because of authority, because he just studied somewhere. He has to have all these virtues. So once he knows all the laws of creation, and it says he has to be a student of the Vedas, whether one takes the book Veda literally and understands it as the four Vedas, or if you take Vedas as the ancient eternal wisdom, which the rishis realized and passed on to us by tradition, oral tradition, written tradition, however you understand the Vedas, but the knowledge of creation. And of course, Shabda says that the Vedas are the knowledge and the word of the Supreme Being, and therefore it is the supreme authority. That is why in the Arya Samaj, the Nyaya is used because it appeals. The epistemology or the rationale given for how one tests and determines knowledge is the Nyaya plays a very important part. Right, then the next one is when we use history or tradition, and we call it aitihiya. Those of you that know itihasa as a word, you'll relate to this word. And that's a very simple one. Recordings of past history and historical persons gives you knowledge. And generally, of course, you may say that it is subject to people's interpolations and perceptions and how they presume history. That's another matter. But we record history. And again, it works on the premise that we will do so honestly, right? Like we have our epic literature and all of that, where we try and trace our history, but we have to be careful. Of course, there's mythology and history, and determine between the two. And here we're talking about history as it has happened in the past, recorded and passed on to us, so we acquire a knowledge of the past, of history and tradition. Now, Arthapati is authority, and based on Artha, right? If you can disregard that little mark on the A, Arthapati is based on Artha and meaning, right? So we presume, right? Yeah, just put on, thank you very much for that, just an ordinary. So we assume on the basis of authority. We all learn, we study in school, and even in school we are taught that clouds bring rain. Therefore, presumption is also has to be do with cause and effect. Right? So, if you don't have clouds, we can't have rain. So we have a simple system of everything must have a cause and effect, right? And there can be no effect without a cause. Right? Now, I'm not going to labor that point too much. Most of us understand it. Right? And remember, when you're talking of that, particularly cause and effect, we are talking about arthapati and presumption as one of the very important aspects of nyaya. Then the seventh one is probability, sambhav, the possibility of something. Yes, sambhav hai, means it is possible. Now, we talk of sambhav as being only things that are probable according to the laws of nature. For example, right, children born without parents. You can't have children being born without parents. Nowadays, you may argue about modern science and all of that, but I'll leave that to the people. Maybe Professor Joshi can handle that question. But we are talking about the natural law and how nature works and how we believe things, because it is somehow, it is possible through the laws of nature. So children are born because there are parents there. Right? We can't have the dead suddenly being brought to life. We're not talking about reincarnation now. We're talking a person who has definitely died, and then we suddenly now say, he's come back to life. Right? Mountains are lifted by humans. Right? So it is not possible for a human being. Although we have our stories, remember, don't forget now, our great poets and people who have written this beautiful mythology for us, don't start using that in this now. Our stories are beautiful ways of expressing things, and you must not mix it up here now with a proper debate or discussion, on reason and logic. So you can't get stone according to the laws of nature, right? You can't get people walking around with mountains in their hands. You can't get stones to start suddenly floating, or you can't get horns on the heads of human beings, because that is not how nature is. Simple laws of nature that work, that we see in operation every day. Then the next one is negation. Right? Negation is the absence of proof or the absence of what you are told. For example, you tell somebody there's a man on the island, and you go on the island and you don't see a man. Then from that's again knowledge. By the absence of the man, you have deduced now is not there, therefore there is no man. So that absence also, again, people remember, I'm doing Nyaya in a very short 15-20 minute presentation. It's a detailed, it is a whole philosophy, and the Nyaya Sutras are there. It goes into detail explaining how abhav, the absence of things, helps you to determine knowledge and what your knowledge is, and how you determine it by things being present or things not being present. Then people, after Nyaya, there's a school called Vaisheshika, and others as well associated to Nyaya. By the way, the Rishi is Gautama Rishi, who is 4th century BC. 4th century BC, Gautama is a Rishi, right, who is regarded as authority on Nyaya. So the 8 may be reduced to 4. Like I said, I went through it. And if you wish to look at it, if we look at the similarities, then intuition, pratyaksha, right? And Inference is Anumana, they stand. But with number 2, inference, Anuman, you can add presumption, probability, and negation, because you can somehow relate them. Right? And then you'll have to third, comparison, which is Upamana. I did that with you. But if you could just go back to the slides and look at them, right, you will see, and the verbal authority, Shabda, that stands on its own. Right? So, and then, like I said, you can reduce it to 4. And you have, therefore, the 8, points in the epistemology or the rationale of what Nyaya is and how we go about, trying to determine knowledge and how we ascertain knowledge, how we determine then how we have the truth. And also people, without saying too much, Swami Dayanand believed in this very strongly, and he used it because he uses very much in determining, the Vedas and making Vedas. Therefore, based on Nyaya, he said these are the Vedas, and how he then found that it fitted into this test of the, 8 aspects of Nyaya. Right? And today, Nyaya is a very important aspect of Indian philosophy. I hope I've done justice to it. Namaste and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rambilas. I know you need a whole day to workshop all of this and go through it, but I certainly hope you've whet everybody's appetites to actually begin to look at Vedic logic and begin to reason more appropriately using our ancient tools that we have. We'll now have Professor Joshi to share with us the value of Vedic logic in our current context as a guide to living. And without further ado, I'd like to ask Professor Joshi to come on. Thank you.
Namaste to everybody, brothers and sisters. I listened with great interest to the talk just delivered. And if I go back to my interpretation of the brief given to me to address today, then the impression I was given was that I was to attend to address the issue of the darshanas, and then perhaps make some comment on how one would bring in the darshanas in our current interpretation of what's happening in the country in terms of the modern day scourge and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of stick to my brief because that's what I've given it some thought. And with your indulgence, I'm going to proceed to talk about that. So essentially, we're looking at the 6 systems of philosophy of the Saddarshanas. And the first talk very eloquently addressed the issue of Nyaya philosophy of Gautama, and reference was obviously made to its close association with the philosophy called Vaiseshik, which was the work, in fact, of Kannada Rishi in the main. And his thoughts dwelt on the idea that the world is made up of a combination of what he called atoms, tiny particles, the Anu. And then he referred to this Anu as the minutest indivisible particle that one would find, or Parama Anu. And these join together in various different ways, like we see chemicals taking place, forming different molecules. In that type of way, combination of these atoms gave rise to various structures within Prakriti, within nature, and gave rise to the world that we see in front of us. That's the second system. The third system, and I'm going to briefly outline this because there's not much time to go into any of these in any degree of detail, is the third one is the Mimamsa, or the Purva Mimamsa philosophy of Jaimini. Now, this is a very interesting philosophy. Very interesting from the perception that The advocate of this, Jaimini, did not actually interpolate the presence of a god. It was not based on um, God being present and God being a creator. But what he did say is that the world is created, and in this world, if one wants to attain higher things, attain what one desires, and so on and so forth, what one needs to do is to perform rituals and perform yagnas and recite shlokas. And all this has to be done by qualified people who are adequately trained and competent in doing this. And if these things are done properly, then one's desires will be attained. That one will reach that state of understanding of achievement, what one wants to achieve. So one doesn't need a god to appease with all these incantations and so on, but that the very vibrations of these shlokas and these prayers that you are offering have an effect at some level, maybe a vibrational level, which then will induce changes and make things happen. And you find that some of the people that were involved in this, Jaimini was the greatest proponent of this, but many of you may be familiar with the life of Sri Shankaracharya. And after having propounded his philosophy of Advaita, he was on his way to, like it was done in the old days, debate your philosophy with people of different viewpoints. And he was on his way to meet Kumarila Bhatta, who was also a very pronounced, well-known, prominent ritualist who followed this philosophy of Purva Mimamsa. And at the time that he met him, he was sitting on a burning fire. He was self-immolating himself. And the reason for the self-immolation was that he had been drawn into an argument with the Buddhists at the time, who were the dominant religious group in India at that part of that period of time. Started off around over 500 BC and then continued up to the time that we got various reformers. And he had engaged in a debate, and the terms of the debate were that if one loses the debate, one has to give up one's life. And he had unfortunately lost the debate with one such Buddhist, and he was then self-immolating himself. So at the time that Sri Shankaracharya met him and said to him, I've come to have a discussion and discourse, obviously, Kumarila Bhatta said this is hardly the time and place to get engaged in discussions of this order, but referred him, in fact, to Mandan Mishra. You might have known, followed up also in Sri Shankara's story. This is where this fits in. And Mandan Mishra was another person practicing ritualism, thinking that if rituals are performed perfectly, then one can achieve one's objective. And they were teaching this, and they set up schools. And then when Shankara goes to him, they come to an agreement that we will debate, and whoever wins the debate, the loser will join the winning opponent. And that's another interesting story on its own, which I am not going to go into now, but I hope that some of you will read this because it's fascinating reading. And that was, in fact, the Mimamsa. So we've talked about the Nyaya philosophy, the Vaisheshik philosophy, and now we've talked about the Purva Mimamsa. Then we come to the Samkhya philosophy. Now, Samkhya philosophy is a dualistic school of philosophy. It talks about two independent entities. One is Purusha and one is Prakriti. Purusha is the power, the very base on which Prakriti performs its actions. But the Prakriti draws its energies from Purusha, but it's separate from Purusha. So they don't have, in fact, a cause and effect relationship, but they are two independent entities. This philosophy brought in the ideas of consciousness and matter, and then very similarly said that in order to understand things, one had to have correct perception, one had to have correct inferences, and then of course the hearing, the Sharona or the Shabda that we heard about in the Nyaya philosophy. So very briefly, they talked about this. You see that in the Bhagavad Gita, Shri Krishna talks about Sankhya philosophy as something that's also been accepted by him. Then you move on to the more popular philosophies that are practiced these days, and these are the yoga and the Vedanta. The yoga philosophy of Patanjali uh, brings to us the whole presentation of the Ashtanga yoga, or the 8-step yoga. And the 8 steps, in fact, are yam, niyam, asan, pranayam, pratyahar, dharana, dhyan, and samadhi. Right? So you start off with yam, things that you are going to restrain yourself from. Niyam, the things that you are going to follow and make sure you observe on a regular basis your observances. Then asan, finding a comfortable posture in which you can sit for prolonged periods of time during meditation without being disturbed. Then pranayam, a whole process, in fact, of breathing, nothing very complex, that is done, in fact, by people who practice pranayam exclusively, but a simple process of breathing in, holding, breathing out. The purak, the kumbhak, the rechak, and having a certain ratio within which you do this. So you do this in a cyclical sort of method. And what has been found in this methodology is that as one does this process of breathing and so on, there's a direct relationship between breath control and mind control. So if you want to bring your mind under control, control your breath. Very often we find people get very agitated and very excited, and what they are told is, okay, settle down, take a deep breath. Just take a deep breath and sit for a while. And that deep breath is meant to bring everything back into control again. Right? So the whole power of breathing is a very, very important component of this philosophy. Then from pranayam, one goes to pratyahar. Now, pratyahar, we heard about the Vinanindriyas, the indriyas that go out, that keep the body and the mind away of what is going on around it through various senses. So sensory input comes in via these indriyas, and they keep the mind informed. So the mind acts as a coordinator of all these inputs and decides where it is, what it has to do, and acts on the ideas that it gets from this information from the Gnanendriyas. And then Pratyahar then says that what you want to do in this Ashtanga Yoga is gradually withdraw your focus from each of the senses. So you withdraw gradually as you sit in meditation. You close your eyes, and as you close your eyes, you shut out the world and you start shut out vision, which is a major distraction. Then as you meditate, then as you focus on a form, on a diya, on a concept within your mind, on a mantra within your mind, you gradually start listening less to what's happening, and you become oblivious of what's going on around you. Likewise, you become oblivious of where you're seated, and your senses become gradually numb. In that way, one by one, all these senses are brought under control. And when these senses are totally stilled, then the whole direction of the mind can be directed internally and becomes antarmukhi instead of baharmukhi, which it was in response to the sensory input. So that was pratyahar. Then if you're doing all this correctly, and it's done properly and so on, then the external features, the external agents, if you like, of the Ashtanga Yoga have all been under control. Then you come to the 3 internal ones. This then will lead to dharana. And dharana is a phase of concentrated thought on what you're meditating upon. And remember, meditation is difficult in the beginning. The mind wants to run after various thoughts, various ideas, and one needs to sit back gradually and lovingly and kindly, not to end up in a Mahabharat war in your mind, but to come to some sort of agreed compromise that, okay, Let's try and settle down gradually. And you slowly concentrate your mind on your object of meditation, your Ishta Devta, or whatever what you're focusing your attention on. And once you do that with concentration for a certain period of time, and you become then merged in the state, and slowly from that state you move from dharana into dhyan, which is meditation. And then if you maintain the state of dhyan for a steady period of time, then you merge, you forget about the self, the individual is forgotten about, the Jiva Atman that you think you have been all the time is forgotten about, the meditator that you think you are is forgotten about, the object of meditation disappears, and what happens is, with the loss of the subject and the object, what remains is the experience of meditation. And this takes you to a union, if you like, emergence, if you like, because it's an artificial mergence, but it's a mergence of the idea of a Jivatman and a Paramatman. And when you dispel this disparity between the two, then you experience that oneness, that unity. That state is called Samadhi. Right? And then Samadhi is another beautiful experience, because there are various stages of Samadhi that have been described as well. But I'm not going to go into that because we have time constraints. But this then brings us to the idea that the whole Patanjali's yoga system of how we unify the idea of a Jivatman, of the Paramatman, into taking us to unity. Then we come to Vedanta philosophy. And Vedanta philosophy is attributed to Maharishi Vedvyas. And he's talked about the nature of the individual Atman and the Paramatman. And we know that the Vedanta philosophy, there are three large schools that are practiced within the Vedanta. And we talked about the Dvaita Vedanta, the Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta, and then the Advaita Vedanta. Now, each one has a separate proponent. The Dvaita philosophy, the greatest proponent of that was Madhavacharya. And then the Vishishta Dvaita, the proponent of that was Ramanujacharya. And then the greatest proponent, in fact, of the Advaita was Sri Shankaracharya. Now, what's the difference between these? Dvaita is, there is a total disparity between the two. There is God, and then there is the disciple, or there's a bhakta. So there's a difference between bhakta and Bhagavan. And the two never become one. The one supplicates himself, brings about all concentration and prayer onto the higher entity, which is the God, and then offers everything for God. So you do everything for God. Whatever work you do, whatever charity you do, whatever achievements you have, everything is an offering to God. Right? So that's the Dvaita school of thought. Then the Vishishta Advaita school of thought is that you, as an individual, or the manifestation in the world, is a part of the totality. We find that in the 15th chapter of the Gita, in the Purushottama Yoga, Shri Krishna says that an infinitesimal portion of myself has become this entire world, entire cosmos. So a small portion of it is expression is there. And then the third one, in fact, is Advaita, which says that what you're seeing as different from me is basically mithya, it's unreal, it's illusion, it is wrong identification, it's based on misapprehension arising from non-apprehension of your true nature. Right? Actually, there's only one, and there's one without the second. So put it very simply, basically you would say that you take two individuals standing side by side, would represent Dvaita. You take one individual with his arms stretched out and his 5 fingers, and then you say all the fingers are not him, nor is he the fingers, but the fingers are part of him. So as the fingers are part of him, that relationship of that continuum between the two would be described as Vishishta Advaita. And then Advaita means there is only one, there is no separate entity. So this is then the way we look at the combination of the two and the completeness between the two. So like we said, what's popular, in fact, is the yoga and the Vedanta schools of thought, which are more popular if you go around, in fact, in Hinduism, though other schools do exist, as we heard from the first talk. And the other term that has been used for Vishishta Advaita is qualified monism. That means there's still one God, but you are part of that one God and not separate from the one God. Now, all these philosophies can be very confounding and confusing. And does it mean that if we have all these different philosophies, that now we can only join group A, group B, group C? That we have to now pick and choose which ashram or which institution we're going to join? The answer is no. Essentially, the mature understanding of the different philosophies are put together in a final understanding of what you practice. So we'll find that in life, in Sri Shankaracharya, let's look at his lifestyle. Shankaracharya in his life talked about Advaita, but yet in his life, he writes a hymn to the mother, venerating the mother, glorifying the mother. The mother represents a form, and he talks about a formless, and yet he writes a beautiful poetry glorifying the other. So you'll find that with us as well, there are times when you are inclined towards wanting to get into a logical discussion, become questioning and inquiring into things and so on, and you want to use various aspects of the logic, the Nyaya philosophy. And you can do that. And then you'll find that, okay, but you also accept aspects of a scientific philosophy with the atoms existing and so on and so forth. So there's also a scientific basis. Then you can move on and say, okay, fine, I have a scientific basis. I accept that, but I'm a bhakta at heart. I like to sit down and sing a good bhajan, and I like to join a satsang and enjoy and play the baja and whatever, and sing along. And I have great joy in doing that. And that also, in fact, is an offering to something that you consider higher in your own mind. And then again, having had that session, you may decide you want to go back and sit quietly in meditation, in the silence, and withdraw yourself totally in the hope of getting that oneness and the experience of oneness. And all those experiences we've seen in all those groups, that in the Dvaita schools of thought, we have the Miras, the Mirabais, we have the Narsi Mehtas, we have so many examples of people who are bhaktas who reach the highest states of realization. So it does not mean that if you belong to the Dvaita or the Vashishta Advaita or the Advaita, any one of them guarantees that you can reach that state. That we often use an admixture of things to find our way around. So understand the philosophies, use the best tenets of your understanding. And what you don't understand, leave aside for a while. Take what you can understand and working on that, do something. The point is sometimes you get caught up with the letter and not the spirit. We sit with the books and we say, what does the book say? And it says that, and it says that, and it says that. And then we ask the person, what do you say? And he repeats what the book says. So no. What do you say? And the person doesn't have much to say, because all he can do is repeat what the book says. Now, let's not become like a parrot that can only repeat what the book says. Right? We need to learn to read between the lines. And therefore, in our scriptures, it's told that if you want to higher realization and you want to experience that oneness, then it is not through charity or through knowledge that you can reach that state. So then we say, but why knowledge? The knowledge that we're referring to is that type of book knowledge that stays in the book, sometimes transcribed to the mind as part of an intelligence scheme, but never transmuted into your body as part and parcel of your totality. You've got to realize that you are not this separate individual, depending on which philosophy you're going to accept. And as you take on the different philosophies, you want to try and transcend the limitations of our own ideas to find a higher purpose and understanding in what we want to find within ourselves. So Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita at one stage will tell Arjun, whether you offer me a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or a drop of water, if it's done with devotion, I accept. Right? So now he's talking purely about a bhakta and a Bhagavan who accepts this. Okay, the duality we talk about. At another time, like I said in the 15th chapter, he says, a portion of myself has become all this. And then in the final chapters, towards the end, he says, Sarva dharmam paritajya, mamekam sharanam raja. Give up all these dharmas, give up everything. Just come and surrender unto me. Surrender what? Surrender your ego, surrender your separativeness. And if you can do that, then you're going to find yourself merging into something much, much higher. And then even beyond that, in the end, having said all this to Arjuna, he says, now I've told you everything, now you decide what to do. And that's what these scriptures tell us. They give us all the information. They give us all the knowledge. We can sit down and we can memorize it, and we can think we are very knowledgeable, or we can be simplistic and say, let me try and imbibe these values at a much basic level. Let me understand the simple principles, the simple concepts, and see if they can percolate my thinking, so that my thinking doesn't become my thinking, it just becomes thinking. And the mind disappears altogether. And let this then shine through as that totality. So, having talked about this, it comes now in a roundabout way to, or even before I get to the pandemic, we'll find that Shri Krishna extols, in fact, the importance of action. So he's not talking about a sannyasi and a householder. Those things are being made big and prominent today in the world we live in. As if we are born to be holders of something. Hearth holders, householders, commandal holders. Are we holding on to something? We don't have to be defined as such. Because Shri Krishna tells us very, very clearly that sannyasi is not adorning a gown, adorning a garb, which is a gerua cloth, an orange cloth. But sannyasi is in the mind. And Krishna is living in this fancy kingdom of his, with all his wives and families and involved in politics and war and what have you. And yet, very few can take up the argument and challenge and say he was a true sannyasi. Because a sannyasi is one who is not mentally attached to anything. There's no mental attachment. You use what is there, and having used it, and while using it, you never think it's yours. You're always the caretaker of it. So he brings in this idea of a unity. You find Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy, where he lives a life in inverted commas of a householder. He was married. While he was married, he was training people. He was training people who were sannyasis, the Vivekananda and the Vedanandas and that group of people. At the same time, side by side, he had numerous household disciples whom he was training, like Nag Mahashay and Shri M, who actually wrote his biography. And the book that we use today, in fact, the Katha Amrit, to tell us about the life of Sri Ramakrishna. So he didn't make distinctions between the two because he didn't see distinctions. He was truly seeing. Those who were seeing distinctions were not really seeing. When he talked about bhakti, he went to the Kali temple and he saw mother and spoke to the mother. And then when his guru came along, Totapuri, and said, no, God is, what's this, you're wasting your time in the mandir? God is formless. And he was willing to listen to the formless aspect, try meditative practices, achieve that, and then came to the conclusion that God is both with form, without form, beyond form, and at the end of it, only God knows what it is. So there were no separation between these various groups. So what we do is we cast ourselves into various people, various groups, how we live, what we do, But what we need to realize is forget all those things, all the little paraphernalia that we've thrown in with, come back to a simplistic level and say, I've been put in this place. What do I do? I'm here by the will of God. What do I do by the will of God? And I remember him or it or her at every step that I take in whatever I do. So now I'm going to sort of try and round this off by talking about how do we bring this and see this in terms of this pandemic. Now, this current pandemic that's upon us is raising numerous questions. And the one big question is this the wrath of God for my individual karma, for my collective karma, that we as a group, in fact, have done very bad things and now we are all being punished? You know, we get droughts and people say, you see, the people have been very bad and therefore God has given you this drought, right? And then you get pestilence, and then you get floods, and then you get fires. And then you say, well, that's punishment for the bad they've done. So now you're going to pay for all this, right? And this is like the common type of thinking people take on. So whatever happens, it's got to do with something that I have done. Right? That's an individual sort of thing. Me, God is there. And God is now punishing me and the lot. On the other side, the people who see this from a divine perspective, see this as a divinely orchestrated drama in which God says, what have people done to the earth we've given them? They've created pollution, deforestation, rivers have dried up, animals have been driven into little corners. So where they were living comfortably, the animals have now been pushed and pushed and pushed away into small little places, even into extinction. And is it now the divine saying, hold on, this whole process needs to be redressed, let's bring everything under control? So much so that we suddenly find that people will say that in the canals of Venice, for example, they never saw fish because the water was so murky and so polluted that suddenly they were seeing fish swimming around. That people were seeing animals coming out of the forests onto the roads and so on. That the atmospheric pollution that you saw in so many cities, major cities, was suddenly dwindling altogether. The atmosphere was clearing. Everything was getting better. So the person who saw this from a divine perspective and said, all this is a hand of God, whatever God does is for the best reason, that is my worldview, that is my perspective. Then your conclusion is whatever God does for the right reason. God is giving us a lesson, and I'm going to now act on the basis of this lesson and try and do what I can. So in other words, not see divinity and humanity as two counterposed opposites, but to say to ourselves, can't we see this as a natural continuum of one where we've only thought about ourselves and the one that is totally selfless, and let's now draw a line towards that. And let's bring the two together into a mergence where the two act, in fact, in unanimity, right? So we don't see God as separate, as doing things differently for us and so on. And we can only see this if we can begin to understand that if whatever philosophy we take, at the end of the day, in each of the philosophies, the servants of each philosophy are dealing with life. They're living people trying to find moksha, trying to find salvation, though the term doesn't really exist in Hinduism. They're trying to find some such state of being. And the thing is that when you die, all of them say you go back to that from which you came. So all of us believe you're going to go back to where we came from, or most of us do. In this Vedic law, all of us do, because we believe in Purva Janam and so on. So therefore, if we find this as a cyclical sort of condition, then we say we need to do what we have to do to improve and redress the wrongs we've done in the past, to try and overcome all the wrong things that we have attained to now and leave the world a better place for our children and for the future generations. That essentially we are not dependent verities on the world to say, God, you do everything and we'll sit and do nothing. But we are the instruments that are going to now join in on this whole process to try and improve what we can do. And therefore, taking the type of worldview can make a difference in how we view things. One, in fact, for being totally paranoid that God is now really very cross with us. To the other end, where we have, as individuals, were given a lot of latitude and free rein, but we've overlooked a lot of issues which we should not have. And now that we've done that, let's now take the cue. The time has arrived for us to do something meaningful and practical, and then bring in this totality. Because Sri Krishna Bhagavan says in the Gita that my nature is twofold, right? My twofold nature. One is the eightfold apara prakriti, and then the para prakriti. Right? The apara is the world, eightfold, the five elements, Pancha Mahabhutas, ether, air, fire, water, earth, Manas, Buddhi, Ahamkar, that's the eightfold. That is now acting as one. That is part of my nature. And the other part of my nature is the Atman, right? The unborn, the unrelenting, the eternal, the totality, the basis on which everything depends. So he says, I'm both. And if he's both, then you are both. And find that common ground to feel that oneness, and let's work in concert from that understanding. So let's take our darshanas, let's take our scriptures, and let's get a new understanding into the scriptures rather than having a pedantic attitude and just saying that, fine, we've got all these certificates, because the certificates are not what count. Right? It's a test of life. That's the real test. Let's pass the test of life. So with those words, I thank you all for giving me the opportunity. Hari Om Tat Sat.
Thank you very much, Pankaj Bhai. I think you've done justice to what we discussed. And yes, thank you for really emphasizing the practice and giving us a bridge for each of us to actually navigate the course of the 21st century. You've been exposing a lot of things, and just like Dr. Rambilas raised, we can't do justice to this in one session, in 1 hour. So I'm pretty sure we're going to have to call both of you back at some stage to really begin to talk further on a lot more. I want to actually then open up now for participation, for our audience to share their views. To speak during the discussion session, please unmute yourself. And once you have spoken, please mute yourself. You may also raise a hand, and let's open it up. Are there any points? Lekha, can I please see the full screen? If you could stop spotlighting. Great. Are there any questions, any comments? If there aren't any, I do want to raise a few points. So one is that despite this very rich tradition of critique and logic, we do have superstitions and illogical beliefs that seem to be reigning in Hinduism. And now we have social media that really puts out fake news, and it moves very fast, it moves rapidly. So maybe the two speakers want to think about that. Are there any other questions from anybody? Okay, I'm not going to force because it's been a lot, I think, for everybody. Dr. Ramvilas, do you have any points to speak to on that point that I've raised about the superstitions and illogical beliefs that's coming about and how social media is being used right now?
Not really. I think there's nothing new I'd be able to say on it, except for known facts. You know, South Africa is a major problem, and I don't want to go into it. In birth of various movements within all the major religions, where people are simply peddling religion. And unfortunately, see, Professor Saab he did a good thing by just taking all of these things and putting it together and saying, the bottom line is you have to find yourself. And no matter how much you speak about blind faith and superstition, it's just not going to help because people are insecure, haven't found themselves. And as long as they do that, they're going to be praised, they will be victims to all kinds of people who peddle, whether it be in the name of religion or it be in any kind of consumerism is another thing. It's also blind faith and superstition in a way, where people just buy into things because of the media and how well you market the product. So that's as much as I would like to say on that. Thank you.
Professor Joshi, do you have some views on that point?
Actually, to have views on something that you describe as illogical makes it a challenge in itself then. And the thing is, superstitions is something, in fact, our religious leaders have been fighting for ages. And it's a battle nobody's ever won. It's that group of people that will not want to learn and understand and find the answers within the scriptures, but want to come with some sort of self-made decision about what they think that is. And very often with these people that have all these superstitions, they want some sort of magical formula. They're in search of gurus, not in search of knowledge from gurus. They want gurus that can create miracles. And if you can find a miracle maker, then hang on to him. Then you just look after him as long as you can look after your miracle part of it. But, the beauty is, some time back, we had people that had ashes appearing at home. And, I'm sure it happened in Durban, it happened here in Pretoria. And people would go to the homes and see the ashes and said, wow, look at this fantastic, we're seeing ash developing. And you were seeing now, whatever the mechanism here that might be, I'm not sure. But let us presume, let's give them the benefit of the doubt that there was, in fact, some sort of miraculous basis. Then the biggest miracle to me is that having seen something so profound, you need not become more religious. You did not think that God has the power to do these things, and I can then join that bandwagon. That is to me, the most remarkable thing. That seeing something so fantastic and not being moved by that at all, you're not going to change those people. All they're saying is, will you give me some of the ash because I can throw it around my house to change the tokoloshi away or change evil spirits away or something like that. So superstition and illogical beliefs, go hand in hand. And when you talk about the social media, the ease with which you can spread nonsense on the social media and to try and take every issue and try and answer it becomes a total waste of time. Like you say, Hazrat Rabia, if we're talking about now during Ramzan, from Basri was told, don't you hate the devil? And she said, I don't have enough time to love God. Where am I going to hate devil? Now that's the point. Where are we going to chase the superstitions and illogical beliefs when we can't find enough time to venerate and study and imbibe these teachings?
And just to add, I think we've seen in the news that even in the Christian religion, there is these guys who actually do fake work. I remember very clearly seeing the guy wake up in the coffin. And, a lot of it is linked to money making. So that's quite interesting. But perhaps we need to just, staying on this point, just take into account that the use of the Hindu scriptures in recent times, and I think in the last 20 years, has been to promote hatred and discrimination. And this has been increasing with the rise of the Hindutva ideology. And that's something that also stops people from basically doing self-study and really being critical about things. I'm not too sure whether, Bhairambilas, you have something to say on this. I know you've been attempting to try and ensure that there isn't too much of it in South Africa, but the reality is that the Hindu scripture is being used to actually bring about hatred and discrimination within within humanity. And I think in particular, Muslim community and the Christian community is being attacked. Bhaji, do you have something to say on that?
Yeah, Karuna, firstly, I do not know. I don't know if you're trying to relate that topic to this topic at all. And I don't necessarily agree with what you say. Because in as much as fundamentalism in any form is not a good thing, we're not getting this kind of thing in all religions. A kind of fundamentalism that we've suffered, that Hindus have suffered terribly over. I mean, look at the history of India. So I do not know about fundamentalism. I'm not an expert on it. I'm not a politician. But I think, that a positive, revitalizing, a positive way of becoming Hindus and being proud of ourselves as Hindus is something that is long, long overdue. If you take South Africa, most of the people that are commenting refuse to acknowledge that there were attacks, totally unprovoked attacks on Hindus by the IPCI. And up to this day, it's something that happened then and today, it's being condemned by the Muslim community. We can understand, but there were a few voices that spoke against it, totally unprovoked. A cassette produced from Hinduism to Islam, and we were talking about Nyai. They used Nyai to make comparisons between pornography and the blue gods of Hindus. So we must be very careful when we say these things. You must be very guarded, because sometimes when you go on taking a community to be calm and passive and quiet, and then the rate of conversions are going on, and as soon as anybody as a Hindu tries to raise a voice and say what is being done is wrong, then everyone is regarded as being Hindutva and all of that. How people, you can take the word Hindutva and you take the word history. How one person teaches history, is different, because it will have an angle that will suit that person. The white man will teach a history on apartheid, and it will be different. How the African will treat and teach the history of Africa. Right? So similarly, Hindutva, as a Hindu, we look at the meaning of Hindutva and look at it, what its positive things are. And like somebody said, and even the Prof said, if you take a knife, a kitchen knife, you can either a mother can lovingly prepare a meal with it, right? And another person can take that knife, the same knife, and kill the very same mother with it. So it's a question of the mind of the person who's using the knife. Okay? And so I'm very guarded.
And it brings us back to this whole issue.
Yeah. I think
of ensuring that
must be very guarded in people who are trying to promote Hinduism. And we really need that, because our numbers, the conversions, and all of that, and the history of India will tell you of the ruthless treatment of Hindus over time. So when we make such statements, we must be very careful, we must be guarded, we must qualify it and do a proper comparison of the kind of religious tolerance on all levels, rather than take a particular movement or particular group and say, these people are promoting hatred. I mean, the other religions, talk of Hindus, it stands nowhere compared to the kind of hatred being promoted by other people against Hindus. So I just caution everybody about how we make statements and pronounce on that.
Professor Joshi, any views on that?
Yes, in fact, it's always a very touchy subject. And I think, it sort of goes back historically to the time that Hinduism, without question, is the most ancient religion that is still being practiced at the current time. There were many other ancient religions. All of them were fallen by the wayside, and they've been superseded or supplanted by newer forms of thought, newer groups of people, newer prophets, etc. And therefore, in fact, Hinduism at the time that it arose had no other competitor religions. Therefore, there was no need for Hinduism to talk about conversion. The only conversion that Hinduism has asked for is conversion of the self. Convert your lower self to your higher self. So don't stay there at the bottom where you are, but be a better person. That's the only thing it's asked for. It's asked for betterment. So when other people come to us and say, I love this religion of Hinduism, how do I become a Hindu? Then we go back historically because this runs in our blood and we say, basically, you know what? You don't have to be a Hindu. Whatever you are and whatever you regard yourself, be a better person. And that's what Hinduism teaches. I mean, I've had people, many years back, there were people that were referred to me from UNISA by the person who was the head of Department of Religious Studies, and Professor Kruger, and he said that I know you well, and I've got a person here, and husband and wife, and they want to become Hindus, and they want to talk to somebody. So I suggested they come and talk to you. So they came along and sat and chatted. And I said, okay, tell me, what's the story? No, they're disgusted with Christianity. It's terrible. They're doing this, they're doing that. So I said, hold on. Are you disgusted with Christianity or churchianity? Are you disgusted with your church or are you fed up with Christ? And then they paused and they said, oh, there is a distinction. So I said, the distinction is Christ was a philosophy. The church is a practice in the name of that philosophy, which is far different from that philosophy. Now, as a Hindu, I couldn't say, no, come along, brother. I'll say a mantra for you and, we'll make you a nice Hindu and give you a nice name. I couldn't do that. But remember, the subsequent religions were now knowing at the ankles, in fact, of this big religions that were already pre-existent. So in order to supplant the followship and the followers, they had to tell them, we've got something that's better. So one of the tenets, in fact, of many of these newer religions that came, with Islam and Christianity, was proselytization, convert people. And their scriptures actually said that as you convert them, you will be remembered and rewarded in heaven. Now, you are fighting against their so-called word of God, against our word of God. Okay, so we tell our chap, you know what, you stick fast, you believe in your dharma and we're suffering, it's our karma, we're going through it, you'll have to pass through it, etc. He doesn't want to know that. He says, no, you organize a job for me, give me a nice house, organize a job for my son-in-law, I'm happy. Then it's okay, you become whatever, religion, then he's happy to convert. So what you're doing is they've been buying those people. Now the thing is, getting those type of converts to that religion does not add to the dimension of sincerity and add, in fact, to the depth of the philosophy. It doesn't. But sadly, we failed somewhere because we've allowed them to slip out of the system. And what they've sort of preyed on is the mythology that we talked about. No, you got a god that's a monkey god. You got a god that's an elephant god. And our people fail to understand these are not gods, these are symbols of values and abstract qualities that we are putting together. They are not gods. So when you talk about Shri Ganesh, his father in fact didn't have a father. So Shri Ganesh doesn't have a grandfather, right? And the type of thing we talk about, these were Swayambhu, born by himself. And Ganesh comes out from the mud. He's created out of mud with values and so on and so forth. And the ego is, the symbolism is so beautiful, right? Why does Shiva chop off Ganesh's head? Because young boy is impudent. What is the impudence? It's the ego. So chop off the ego and supplant it with a head that is showing more tolerance and understanding, and then you can live a proper life. Now, that symbolism is too deep for the average guy. So all they can see is now you've got an elephant god running around. How do you convert them unless they show an interest in wanting to understand where this came from? Short of that, Benji, we've got a problem. We really have a problem.
There's lots of work ahead, so we'll have to actually look at perhaps another session and they are in the chat. There's a few people who are saying that, this was really very informative, and both speakers should be invited to come back and really deliver a lot more. Friends, we're coming to the end of our session. And I just wanted to raise that we do know that the Arya Samaj's 8th principle says that we should adopt science and dispel avidya or non-science. We should promote Vidya at all times. And I think we started on that journey today. Thank you very much, Dr. Rambilas, for that work, and also Professor Joshi for making yourself available. I see your hand is up, Professor Joshi.
Yes, Karunaji. I just wanted to reflect on this. I should have done this earlier, but sometimes memory lapses come through at this age. I recall, in fact, that this meeting was scheduled much earlier. And at the time that it was supposed to have been done, we lost our sister Ushaben. And I wish to invoke a memory again today, because she would have been part and parcel of that discussion. And our heartfelt remembrances go to her. So I thought I'd just add a little bit of that.
Thank you very much. I was going to do it, but I think given your seniority and closeness to the Vedalankar family, it's better that you've actually done it. Basically, we lost a very dear sister who actually used to join our sessions. And yes, we did postpone the session because of her untimely death. So we've gone through a lot on the system of logic in the Vedas, and hopefully this will help us to apply it to our daily lives. That was the message from both Dr. Rambilas and Professor Joshi. Friends, our next webinar will be on the 5th of May, and it's entitled Liberating Our Minds. And hopefully we will attempt to thread all the learnings from previous sessions of the Virtual Bridge series at that particular session. I'd like to ask Pandit Rina to basically close this meeting. Thank you.
Namaste and thank you, Karunaji. Firstly, I would like to thank you for setting the spiritual tent for this evening's webinar. And Lekha Jadu, for your technical work, thank you very, very much. Dr. Rambilas, it's always a pleasure to listen to you. A learned person like you always sends out very good messages. And what I've got out from your message was that learned persons are to have the virtues of righteousness, truthfulness, benevolence, discipline, and adeptness in self-restraint. And I would like to add professionalism and humility, and in accordance to all this. Professor Joshi, thank you for your inspiring talk. It was most enjoyable and captivating. And like you said, we should not be paranoid with our situation. I'm certain that lots of people have learned much more from you today. And to everyone, I think we should just be good, do good, and speak good. And we must always know that in our dharma, there is no founder of dharma in the form of a human being. And there is scope for improvement according to place, person, and time. And the principles are intended to do good to all and bad to none in all respects. And the main aim of our dharma is to discover the true nature of God, soul, and the matter in the universe, and how to harmonize and coexist with each other. And I also wish everyone an auspicious Ram Navami celebration. And let us join our palms together for our Shanti Path. Om Dhyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shantir Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantir Eva Shanti Sama Shantir Edhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste to everyone.